Welcome to the Joyful Nourishment podcast. This is a podcast about our relationship with food and eating, body image, eating disorder recovery, mental health, and more. I am your host, Lynn Thorstensen, a registered nutrition therapist and body image coach based in the west of Ireland. And I'm so glad that you're here. So welcome to another episode of the Joyful Nourishment podcast. And today I'm here with Mirte Kaan. Is that how you say it, Mirte?
Oh, yeah, Mirte Kaan.
Mirte Kaan. She's Dutch, so excuse my lousy pronunciation. Mirte is here to really share some of her own lived experience with an eating disorder and eating disorder recovery. And before I sort of introduce some of her background, I just wanted to say that our intentions for this conversation today is to, I think, highlight a bit more of that lived experience and how isolating it can be when we're in the midst of it, that we don't really talk about it with other people. And it also often feels like we're the only one that don't have our shit together around food and eating when we're in the midst of it. But of course, that's not true. You know, I work professionally with people who are struggling all the time, and I have plenty of clients, unfortunately. So it's not that everybody else has it together. It's just like that. I think there's so much shame around it that it's really hard to talk about it, particularly like when we're in the midst of it. And one of the big things is to take that step to maybe admit that things aren't going as well as we think they should, or that things have started to take over a bit too much. And I'm sure we can talk about that, Mirte. But I'm just going to introduce you to Mirte's background. So she has a Bachelor in Nutrition and Health. She's also a holistic dance and yoga teacher. And as we're here to talk about like her background, then simultaneously with this, she had an eating disorder in her late teens and early 20s, and as kind of part of that also developed all kinds of health issues then that sort of stemmed from this. And this then I think led her to work in the kind of food industry, would you say, from she did a lot of recipe development. She was a FODMAP specialist and had her own company. And then, and I'm sure you're going to tell us a bit more into details, is from here, she kind of had a burnout and then dropped everything and did a 360 and decided to take her life in a different direction and rebuilding her life away from working in the space of food. And so now she has been on this healing journey for over a decade, and she's here to share her story and help us and help people through her own lived experience to get more comfortable in their own bodies. And she's also, in her work, uses holistic dance yoga for this. And I think you're going to have to tell me a little bit more, Mirte, with what you talk about with this ITTI method is as well. And we might get to that to the end. But I am so excited that you're here, and I'm really grateful for us to be able to have this conversation. And I would love us to kind of start a little bit about what you want to kind of build on from this introduction that I just shared.
Mm-hmm.
So welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, I think it's a very good summary, actually. Interesting to hear it from somebody else, like if you hear it back. Yeah, I think that's the overall view of the journey. And what I personally think also is interesting, like how did it come to that? And because a lot of people think that an eating disorder is just that you want to be skinny. And a lot of times, in my opinion, actually, or in my experience and story, it's not really about that. And maybe people start to understand it more, that it's more about control, and it's different. It's a lot of different things. It's very layered. And I really experienced that too. Like it wasn't as simple as like, I want to be skinny, and then yeah, that's it. So
just went a bit wrong.
Yeah.
So what do you think, like when we're in the midst of it, it's really difficult to look at well, what was their origins and what, like, how did I end up here? It's
Yeah.
usually when we get a little bit further into a recovery that we get that space to kind of say, oh, I can see now, well, this kind of thing probably fed into it and this thing fed into it. So, like, from where you are now, looking back, like, what would you think were the things that contributed to your eating disorder?
Yeah. A lot of things. I think it started like I had a quite, in my experience and in like what other people told me, a quite relaxed childhood and everything went fine. And then things went wrong about when my parents got divorced. That was like the overall story kind of. And I think I lived that story until I was 25. I was like, no, it was fine. And okay, not everything went well, but it was kind of okay. And then when you get out of it a little bit, like really get yourself out of the situation, you're not living in the family anymore, you have your own home, etc. I started to see that things weren't really fine or that everything was fine. Like I had a lot of good things when I grew up, but I have a mother with very serious mental health issues. And that was something that really was difficult to talk about because people didn't see it from the outside. So it was something that was very hidden. At home, we noticed, like, and especially, yeah, I grew up with a brother and a sister. And yeah, I think we know, of course, we noticed it the first because we were living in it like real time and every day. And I really started to see how this contributed to not feeling nourished. Like, seriously, I didn't have the mother love, kind of. So my nervous system was set in a way that it was used to having not enough nourishment and to have a lot of stress. Because I call it then the mother energy and the nourishing energy that wasn't around. Like I had to nourish her actually. So when that moment stopped, when I grew up and I was a teen, it was like rebellion a little bit. I kind of stopped giving that to her, like to my mother. And then things went all kinds of wrong because then the whole structure of the family just breaks down a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think like I really see that now. And back then I didn't have any clue. Like I was in the midst of it and really strange, but it's like you have like a blanket over you or something. You can't see what you're in. It's interesting, but also strange. And from that, I think it developed. Like it was just things at home were very stressful. I couldn't talk about it with other people because they didn't really understand. And yeah, I just started to numb myself. I think that's the best word. And food is a very good thing to do that. Like little children even do that to control things, you know. I'm not going to eat because I want to have attention.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I started to control food, like very small steps. It wasn't big in the beginning. It was like tiny things. It was like, okay, I can, you know, do it like this. And then now I see that, but I have a bit control over that. And because your life just feels so out of control, that's something you can hold on to, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is
Yeah.
such a valid point. And I think that it's like you said, food is this tangible thing
Mm-hmm.
that when other things that are maybe less tangible, family dynamics, mental health challenges, other stressors, it's like we can't control them. And particularly, I think, even so when we're young adults or teens and we have even less agency because of, you know, developmental stuff and like the age and like we live at home. So like here's this thing that I can, well, if I decide not to eat this or if I'll skip a meal or I'll do different things, it's like I'm taking that control back for myself and it feels good, right? Did it feel good to do that? Like to
I think that's a very good point you're making because in my head I knew it wasn't healthy. Like it did feel good in a sense because I had control and I had some kind of feelings. Because if you're very hungry, then it is a feeling. It's not a, you can say it's not a very nice feeling, but if you're used to numbing all your emotions, it kind of gives you some kind of sense of I'm alive instead of I'm just, you know, doing my thing, but not really on the planet. And that really felt good. And what also felt good, I do, like I was a teen, and in your teens, I think a lot of girls and also men, but not so much, like more girls, very conscious of your body. Like, ooh, everything is like, ooh, that is not good. And if you combine those two, you're like, ooh, I'm getting a little, I don't even want to call it chubby because I was just growing healthily. But at that moment, you start to go from a girl's body to a woman's body. And it's just different.
It's just different. Yeah.
Yeah. And now I see it as a beautiful thing. But in that time, I thought, oh my God, I'm going to turn into a woman. And in my head, it was very unconscious. That really came later when I did a lot of healing work on this. But unconsciously, I was like, I don't want to be a woman because then I'm going to be like my mother. And that was just too painful. It's like something I wanted to, how do you say that? Avoid at almost all costs. And a lot of people didn't really see that part. They just thought, okay, maybe just eat something more, you know. And it's psychologically so much deeper than that. And I really understood that more when I got older and when I could see things from another perspective. And yeah, but it did feel good. It felt good to have some kind of control, to have some kind of feeling. To have control over, let my body stay like tiny, or not tiny, but like girlish. I think that's more the thing. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of stuff and it just, your story there like really demonstrates the complexity. And then when you said like, right, there is that transition that happens through puberty as well, when particular as women, our bodies are changing a lot. And then you overlay that with the cultural conditioning as well, of, well, it like being in a bigger body is disastrous, and so, you know, should also be avoided at all costs. So there's kind of like those messages then I think can compound the other underlying things that are already there, like to fanning the flame. So how did that kind of, like, how did that then evolve for you as you sort of moved into from your late teens into your early 20s, with all of these kind of different things going on?
Well, I was very interested in health always. Like it also comes from my family. Like I have a lot of people in my family are busy with health and nutrition and exercise also, like not excessive but normal. Like my father is a gymnastic teacher, for example. So I always grew up with healthy living, but I see healthy living as a different thing than being skinny now. Like that time it was different. But so I was very interested in that. So I started to study nutrition and health in Holland. And that really gave me a bit more insight already in like, ooh, okay, what happens? What am I doing? Like, what am I eating and not eating? So the first year was actually very, very triggering. It wasn't very comfortable because you're confronted with food every day. Like, and partly it was very nice because I was like, okay, that was the thing I could control. So if I could study that every day, it's like I got my life in control. Doesn't really work like that, but
that's what it felt like at the time. Yeah.
And I already developed more of a conscious of or around food, around healthy eating, what is healthy, what is not. So I think that also helped me actually in not developing a true eating disorder, or not true. I think this is already a difficult thing. We talked about it before, but like, what is an eating disorder? Is it that you're in the hospital and not being able to function? Or is it just that your mind is busy with food all the time?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think about it, and this is my personal opinion, that we are still across the board holding on to this stereotypes that basically, like, to have an eating disorder or a true eating disorder, as inverted commas, is
Mhm.
when somebody's typically white, young, teenager, thin, and emaciated. And unfortunately, a lot of the services also kind of position that people have to be that sick to get the amount of help they deserve, or they need. But there's a whole spectrum of it,
Yeah.
right? And like you said, I think if we're either questioning that, am I sick enough to get help? You're most likely sick enough to get help. And if you are,
Yeah.
if food and eating is like taking over most of our waking time, I would say something is amiss, because of course we have these physical bodies, they have to get fed several times a day. It's normal to think about food a certain amount at the time, right? It requires planning, shopping, preparation, and the actual physical eating. But outside of that time, and like when we're not hungry, and if we're not hungry all the time, probably can think about a lot of other things as well. But that's kind of, this is from my own lived experiences, like, it's really difficult to imagine that when you're smack bang in the middle of it, and like
Mhm.
you're always thinking about food, probably
Yeah.
because you're not eating enough because you're hungry. Like, so, so like
Yeah.
how, so yeah, so again, I think, do you think that if you didn't have the backdrop of an eating disorder, that you would have chosen nutrition as the field of study?
I don't know. It maybe not, because it was never really my. It sounds very strange, like saying it now, because people always saw me as like, okay, Mirte is just somebody who's busy with food all the time. And I was a recipe developer, so it was very easy to hide behind that career path, actually, which I also really loved. So it's not only that, it's again, it's layered. So like, I really love to be creative with food, and I really like that. But when I started to study nutrition, I from the start I already didn't really feel the true passion about all the numbers about food. It's also it's not really, back then at least, not a very holistic education. So it was very concentrated on, I see it now, old paradigm kind of things, like, okay, if you want to lose weight, you have to, drop your calories or something. And back then I already didn't really feel comfortable with that. So there already was something in my mind like, it's not that, I don't really believe in it that much. And yeah, I don't know. And a friend of mine started to study it, and I really think that also contributed to that. Like, okay, she's gonna do that. I don't know what I want to do with my life. I'm already busy with just handling home and staying alive, kind of. Like, I was very in a lot of trauma responses and fight and flight, etc. So it was also maybe an easy choice. And I really wanted to do back then, actually, a training in a musical, like dancing and singing and, more artistic way of things. But I was just not confident enough to do that. So I thought, like, I can't do that. So I'll have to choose something else. So maybe I wouldn't do that in like, if I choose now, but things went how it went. So I'm not,
Exactly. Yeah.
luckily, I'm not thinking like, oh my God, I chose
Yeah,
wrong.
and you're still, it's never, I don't believe it's, we, what's it saying? We get what we need as
Yes.
well,
Yeah.
so even if the choice would be different now, but it is what it is, and it has also given you the experience through that. But I want to circle back to the other thing that you said, though, that it was easy even when you went in then into the recipe development part to kind of like hide behind that. So
Yeah.
what did your relationship with food look like then when you were like developing recipes and trying things and cooking, and like what did it look like? What did your eating and your relationship with food look like parallel to that process?
It's a very interesting question. I was very conscious of what I ate, but it also went in like I ate a little bit too little and then too much, and it just was, never really safe and peaceful. It was also always something going on, kind of. And like I ate my vegetables, and I ate a normal healthy diet, but very low in fats. So that is also something that eventually actually got me into other health problems, because if you don't fuel your body properly, you'll end up with other things. But how it looked, it was just thinking about it all day long. Like my head was just consumed with food but also recipe development. So it was a very strange combination, because partly it was truly what I loved to do, because I'm a very creative person. So I love to think about new things and love to taste new things. And that also was something that really gave me joy. So it wasn't only difficult and thinking about that I shouldn't eat or something. So part of the day was really about joy, about new things, new countries, and different flavors. But that also made me I put myself in a position with that I didn't have to think about the feelings, or I didn't have to feel my feelings about how my life in general was and how my childhood went, etc. So it was also very easy, exactly what I said, what you said, to hide behind it, because I was just consumed with that, so I didn't have to think about the other things. And also that because I didn't nurture myself on a regular, proper, peaceful basis, I did have, like, we talked about it before, and we actually first, like, we share it, and it's something that also feels a bit vulnerable, but I think it's important to share, because I learned in my education a lot of things, like, okay, if you binge or if you vomit, for example, then you have an eating disorder, So I was like, okay, I just don't do that. Then I don't have an eating disorder. But what I did do was eat a lot of stuff and then spit it out. It sounds very strange now. It's like, when I think about it now, it's like, what did I do? But it was that I had the taste and the feeling, but I didn't want to, like, get fat. I mean, I was never fat, just to be clear about that, actually. And even if I was, like, it's not a reason to torture yourself like that. Let's just say it like that.
Yeah.
And in my head, it was like, okay, I don't have an eating disorder because I don't do the really, big, weird things. But it's not normal if you eat something and spit it out.
No, not really. Like, that is a pretty disordered behavior.
Yeah.
And I think as well, I mean, again, it's different if you're like tasting things and you don't like it, or you're working with like texture sensitivity or that. That's a different thing, but that's not what we're talking about here. It's that kind of underlying, fear, weight gain, and back to control. So it's kind of, it's a stepping stone to purging as well. And some people might do that, and if that's odd, kind of, some people don't do that, but it's like, and it can be a quite difficult habit to get out of. Just stop doing that as well.
Oh my God.
it was hard to stop
Yeah,
doing
it
it.
has really been a journey. Yeah. Yeah, because I just wanted to say actually that like I wasn't able to purge, and I actually think if I was, I maybe would have done that, but I just couldn't, like physically couldn't. So maybe my body was already protecting me, like don't go that route. So I'm
Don't go
very,
that one. Yeah.
very happy with that. And later in life, when I did recipe development, I actually did use the. It sounds a bit strange maybe for people if you don't work in it, but I did spit things out, and also with wine tasting, but that's a different thing, because if you don't do that, you seriously get sick of everything you're eating and you have to taste. Like coffee, people
Yeah.
who do coffee and stuff, they do that too. So, but that's a different thing.
That's a different thing as well. Yeah, that's not quite what we're talking about when
No,
like this sort of
no.
that behavior, which is definitely disordered behavior. Yeah.
Yes. And I think the most important thing behind it is the intention where you do it with, and the thing that, like the story that plays in your head.
I agree.
And the story that played in my head was different when I did like spitting at stuff, etc., than when I did it at work with recipe development. Like that was a different world. So, but how I got out of that, it took a long time. It really took a long time, and it made me, or it forced me to be more patient with myself, because I'm now 36, so I'm like in a way different time in my life. But when I started seeing that it wasn't really good, I think it was when I was 25 or something, 24, 25. And English, we just talked about it. English isn't my first language, so sometimes it's might be difficult, but you have you have like this expression of being conscious of something, and then first it's like you're aware, but it doesn't go naturally, or you have like this
Yeah.
fourth thing.
Yeah. I don't know what the word is in Dutch, but like I remember my Swedish mother saying that just this like word which in English translates to like a lag time. So the awareness grows that something is probably isn't working for me anymore, or it's not helpful anymore, or I don't feel well doing this, or and that could be, we're talking about our relationship in food here, but it can be in other things like in our work or in a relationship or wherever we're living. And then it's like, yeah, and you kind of know, like inside, but you mightn't have a path to how you can change things or what that could look like, or maybe you're not ready. And that sort of lag time, that can be a few years. And I think I don't know if you've ever come across this concept, but it's called the stages of change. It's the Prochaska and de Clemente. It's like 5 stages of change, and they have one of the stages is pre-contemplation, and that's really kind of what we're thinking about. Mm-hmm. So it's like the step before you even contemplate to actually doing something about whatever it is you want to change, and then you move into the stage where, okay, you're actively working on changing, whether it's an eating disorder behavior, or it's like moving your career in a different direction, or changing your relationship or whatever. And then what we often don't talk about, we think then, like their model, is like, well, then you move into action, and then technically you move into maintenance and you stay there. But the thing is that you kind of move from action, and then you can, it's hard to maintain whatever the change, right? So then we kind of move either back into contemplation again, or even pre-contemplation for different reasons. And I read somewhere years ago, so I don't know if this is actually accurate, but that it takes at least 7 rounds of that cycle before we can move into a steady state of maintenance. So basically, that we get derailed, that's part of the process, and it's to kind of continues to come back to like contemplation and into action again over and over in order to maintain, like when people talk about stopping smoking, it's like you might have to stop 20 times before it
Yeah.
sticks, right? And changing eating disorder behaviors, it's not a one and done thing either, is it?
No, and that's exactly, it's a behavior. It's not, it's like a built identity almost. Like you build your life on something, and if you all of a sudden stop that, you're like, okay, oh my God, what, your life kind of feels even more out of control.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I really felt that, because I'm somebody who likes change like yesterday. Not, I'm like, oh, I'm conscious of it. Okay, I'm gonna change it. And yeah, it really didn't work like that. It was going that loop over and over again, and then going crosses and going from that step to that step. And it really took a lot of self-compassion. And I eventually got into yoga also, and that really helped me too, to develop some other qualities than just control. Like, leaning back more into my feminine side, and like, okay, it's okay to fall back. You're not stupid, or you're not worthless because of that. And for me, it took a long time, also because I had that background of having mental health issues in my family, that I already had this voice, this voice in my head that was not very loving. It wasn't helpful in, when I dropped back a little bit, or when I fell back a bit, then it was very harsh. It was so harsh. When I think, like, I still sometimes hear it now, but it's way less loud than back then. So it took a very long time, a lot of trial and error, and a lot of eventually even, and I think that where it really, like, it kind of stopped in a way, and I kind of forgot when. It wasn't like, okay, today it's stopping. It actually went into this process of, okay, it's not very healthy for me. My body is also really telling me that I'm not living a very healthy life. I had all kinds of other health issues. I didn't have a period for a long time. Like, a lot of other things went on, and eventually I just got so sick of it. I was like, okay, I need to change something about it. And it was really a big process of healing a lot of other things, and I'm still in it. Like, I think nobody's ever like totally healed and enlightened and stuff, but it really was a process of, like, slowly being more compassionate and seeing myself doing it, and also in the end seeing myself, like, when do I do it? When do I have the urge to have this sensory feeling of nourishment, but not giving it to myself? So I'm having the sensory nourishment, but I spit it out, so I actually don't give myself nourishment. If you think about that, like, a bit deeper, it's very interesting. It's
very
yeah.
And what is the barrier there to kind of, because it's sort of like a teaser, and then, and if you do want to share, like, I would be really curious to find what was it for you that opened that, like, literally the permission and the space to receive that nourishment from yourself and from the food again?
Well, unfortunately for me, it was a very big wake-up call. It wasn't very friendly. My body just stopped functioning. I went into big burnout, and that had all kinds of reasons. So it's not only the eating disorder things. And when I got into a burnout, I already changed a lot of my thinking and behavior around food. So I wasn't in such a kind of bad place, quote unquote, as I was when I was 20. But my body just stopped. It was like, okay, it's enough. You gave 30 years of your life, you just gave, like, constantly giving, doing, very masculine energy, very just not nourishing myself, literally in all kinds of areas in my life. So not only food, but like everything. And I was at home for a year. Like I literally couldn't do anything. I just was in bed. I could do a few things, but I had panic attacks. Like my whole body was just screaming all kinds of signals like, this is not the way. You need to change. And so I did very slowly. It was a total different way of living that I have now than when I got into burnout. And what's also interesting that I actually already was, before that, I have been depressed, like very depressed. I had, we say it, like the precursor of burnout is, I don't know how you say it in English, but it's...
What's it in Dutch?
It's overspannen.
Like overworked or overwhelmed, or something like.
Overwhelmed. Yeah. I already had that when I was 20, and then again when I was 25. And again, so there were already a lot of signs. There was like, okay, Mirte, this is not the way, but if you don't want to listen, then so now I see it as a good thing. But back then, oh my God, it was so difficult. Because I had to stop doing everything I did. I had to drop all my coping mechanism. Like everything I did to kind of keep myself above water just fell away. And I can now say I just dropped into darkness for 2 years. And slowly got out of that step by step. And realizing like, okay, if I'm burnt out now, it's not going to help me if I'm going to do something that doesn't nourish me. So I need to nourish myself. And that was the starting point of truly nourishing myself. So not on a superficial level, but really thinking about feeling in my body, not only going into that head, but like going down. And from there on, it really changed. Yeah. But it really changed, like not like tiny things, but yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like the what's they call it? It's like the breakdown was the breakthrough. And it also sounds like, in the previous times, and we're in that sort of age of feeling a bit frayed, but there's enough capacity, maybe due to youth or, because it's early on, there's just enough to kind of like push through or just pull it back a little bit, but then go back to doing the same things that we were before that sort of got us there until, unfortunately, it's like no more.
Yeah.
And
I was very strong-willed, and I had a lot of energy when I was young. And I also think that it was because I was so used to not having nourishment that I wasn't even conscious of it. I was just so unconscious. I was like, okay, this is life. Like, this is normal.
Yeah.
It's not, but I also think that really, how do you say that, made it last so long. And that's why I talked about it in the beginning, like, because you could think like, what does your mother with mental health issues have to do with eating disorder? But for me, it was really the way my whole nervous system was wired. It was just not in a very healthy wiring. It was firing on stress all the time. So if you're used to that, you don't really notice it. And that's why I do think that burnout was in the end, very helpful. In the middle, it wasn't very pleasant.
No, I'd imagine it was not. No. And I think, again, I feel like anybody listening, there's definitely people that might be able to relate to parts of your story or some of it, and that it isn't, unfortunately, uncommon either that we get to this place of like burnout where it's like literally you don't have a choice but to drop everything, because we've tried too many times already to push through, and now the tank is like truly empty.
Yeah.
And it's just the only thing that is going to fill it back up again is complete like rest and changing things to
Yes. Yes.
start that like nourishment. You know, I use this sometimes with my clients, like this analogy of a car, like particular when it comes to like fuel, like food. Of course, our bodies are not as crude as cars, but for example, if you are somebody who is often like undernourishing or under eating, it's like driving a car and expecting you're going to go, I don't know, like a long distance journey, and you're putting, you know, fuel so expensive at this time of recording, but say you're putting 20 euros into it and you're thinking, yeah, that will do me. And then all of a sudden the gauge is on that red and you're like kind of starting feeling a bit anxious because you don't know where the next petrol station is going to come up on the motorway. And you're like, or, you know, if you think that you're going to get there, you have to drive really, really slow, because if you're going very slow, that actually burns less fuel, even in a car. But it could take you days to get there, even when if you're flying along on the motorway, you know, you burn more fuel, but you get there quicker. So it's like, it's kind of that, but also then when we're kind of moving to this place to really refuel ourselves, that's like you go to the petrol station and you fill up the tank because you can afford to do that. And you know that when you fill it up, you can drive away and you can be listening to the music or a podcast and you can be relaxed because you don't have to worry when the next petrol station is coming up on the motorway, because you know that you have enough in the tank to get you where you want to go.
Yeah. And when you speak about that, I also think about the oh my God, how do you say this? Permission for yourself to nourish yourself, and the permission to give yourself fuel, like not expecting your body to be on red all the time.
Yeah.
And that was something what actually gave me panic attacks in the beginning. And you hear it a bit more now, actually, when I listen to other podcasts and other people speaking about also other subjects. But if your normal is stress, then when you get into a peaceful, nourishing place, your system can actually freak out in the beginning, because it's like, oh my God, what is happening? This is not what I'm used to. Get me out of here.
Yeah.
So that was a journey of a few years also, to see that I was so used to stress and people not treating me well, actually. So it's not only food, but and to give yourself permission, like, okay, it's actually okay to put up boundaries if somebody doesn't treat you well. It's okay to move towards people who do treat you well. And that can be safe. And that's the same with food. Like, very slow process of, okay, moving from foods that don't really treat you well or that it's not enough, that you move slowly towards, okay, what is nourishing? What does give my body everything it wants and needs? And that's so much more than only having your vitamins.
Yes.
Yeah. It's also soul food and so much more.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that, and that is a process in and of itself, and that in the beginning of that can be actually make you feel worse.
And that was so strange, because I thought, I'm now treating myself well. Like, why am I freaking out? And I still have that sometimes, that I'm so not used to having it good, that if it's good for a long time, I'm like, okay, where's the trouble? Where's the stress? You always go looking for it. And that takes time, and I'm still in that. Yeah.
So like, what would you say, like, did you have any, like, over the years, as you kind of got to the place where like, okay, something needs to be done, and then there was a burnout. And like, have you had professional support throughout your recovery in these different layers? Have you done a lot of it on your own? You know, you mentioned yoga previous, that was really helpful. Like, what has some of those practices or therapies that have been helpful to kind of nurture you back to a different kind of health?
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting story in itself. I'm very stubborn, so I want to do things myself, and I have to be very something has to be good if I want to do it, because there's a lot of things out there in the healing world and in therapy world, etc. And I also don't trust everybody. So a big part of the journey was alone. Also because I didn't really share about the eating disorder things. So nobody really knew. It was in my head. Like, I think people do see it. And I heard a few comments when I was getting, like, I got to a period where I did get really thin, and then I had a few comments. And that made me change a little bit because I didn't like the wrong attention. So I was like, okay, that's not something I do want. So let's move away a bit from that. But mostly I did it on my own. I searched a lot of things online. I read a lot of books. And I did ask for help, but that has always been a difficult thing for me, because that also has to do with my mother is actually a therapist in the mental health industry, let's just say it like that, or psychosomatic, do I say it right? Yeah, world. Mm-hmm. So for me, it was always a big alarming sign. Like, I don't want to go that route. I don't want to be in that world. I don't want to go to therapy, because that's only going to make things way worse. So that in and of itself took a long time for me to actually be able to use the word trauma without me spiraling into big panic. And so that's interesting. But I did get some help along the way. But I did a lot of things myself. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And tell me about then just the yoga. Like, how did you kind of find your way into yoga, and then the dance yoga that you are a teacher in? I'm really curious about that. Disclosure, I'm not somebody who's practiced a lot of yoga, but I have been fortunate enough to dance with 5 Rhythms teachers. I know if you're familiar, which I found incredibly healing and embodying and just amazing kind of, it's just an amazing practice. So just tell me, like, how did you sort of come across that, and what has been so helpful then in your healing journey with those kind of practices?
I think that was the biggest healing in my whole journey. And so I said, like, I didn't get a lot of help. Like, I did get some, but I do go to yoga classes, and I went to there. So then you get help in a way, but you have to do it yourself. And that's something I really like, because then you're not dependent on something or somebody, but you do have this space where you can relax and somebody's watching, if something happens. So for me, that was a very safe space to heal, because somebody was watching, but not so much as a therapist does, talking to you and really straight, in your face. And so that was already a setting where I was feeling a lot more comfortable. And with that, I went into yoga, and I realized, okay, my body just needs more attention. I need more body awareness. I didn't have very well body awareness because I just shut my body off. I was living from, you say, the head and up, or chest and up. So, something like that. And I was totally not embodied. so that really helped me with processing emotions, also to drop into feelings of sadness, of grief, of being able to allow the more difficult feelings and not always searching and reaching for the happiness, because when I did that, I was actually getting depressed. And when I started to allow the negative feeling, or negative, even I say it now, it's interesting, by the way, talking about
The more
conditioning.
difficult, the difficult
Yes.
ones. Yeah, I mean, they are usually harder though to feel sadness and
Yes.
grief and
Yes. And that really helped me with processing that. So that was my therapy almost. Like yoga was my therapy. And I did that for quite a long time. And then it kind of started to move into a way of, I wanted to step more into the lightness of it all, because I did a lot of yin yoga also. So it's really, getting to yourself, getting to the darkness, and also that the darkness can feel safe. But I really wanted to do something more expansive and more joyful. And that's where the dance yoga came in, that it made, just life, I already, you feel lighter, and make it fun. You can step outside of the yoga mat, so you don't have to, it also, it's like metaphorically a bit, you don't have to stay into the lines of your yoga mat, into the box, but you can step out of that. And that was really nice and nourishing, actually, for my, now I see that like inner child also, and for my playful side, because I do have that huge time, actually. I love to play. So that really helped in the healing.
yeah. Yeah, and it sounds as well like a body-based practice was really helpful as well to reconnect and creating that space for feeling the feelings.
Yeah.
And I love like how it sounds from where I'm sitting, like through the yoga practice and using different types of yoga, like yin yoga, and then getting to a place where a part of you or your body says, okay, now I need more life, or coming back into life, and more expansiveness and more
Yeah.
space, and moving in a different way that feels different. And for me, one of the things that has been amazing with the dance, like 5 rhythms, it's like a moving meditation, but there's so much space to do, to just like be in your body. And I think for me personally, like having the music also helps, like that creates a different kind of environment and container for, I suppose, evoking feelings and feeling them. And just, yeah, I don't know, there's something really powerful to that. And then I think as well, sometimes that, like what you said about in yoga, and actually came up with one of my clients in a conversation where being in a room with other people and other bodies, and being held because you have somebody who's holding the space when it's difficult to like just be in your body, you
Yeah.
know? And because sometimes I think it can be really difficult to do that on your own, particular when like we're practicing and we're already struggling with that. Like I've had that experience when I've been on meditation retreats as well, like sitting in silence meditating with other people is, it's hard to describe what it feels like if you haven't experienced it, but it really, you feel held in a very different way than when you're doing that kind of practice on your own.
Yeah. You feel held.
Yeah.
It's exactly the thing that I don't know exactly about your story, of course, but I didn't feel held when I was younger. And so you take that into your adult life, and then a yoga class in that setting can be very, really, you know, regulating for your nervous system, and it just, makes you feel held. Yeah, exactly that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just maybe something for anybody who's listening to this conversation as well, to reflect on and see what is that like. And again, I think you need to find the right teacher, whether it's the right teacher for you, where you're at, whether that's your yoga practice or meditation teacher or dance teacher, like just find your teacher where you feel like it's a safe space and with your people, so that you can allow that space to be and to rest. And
and really listen to yourself in that also, because not every yoga teacher is your person, and that's fine. It's like, it's not their fault, it's not your fault, it's just, is it a match or not? And I've done a lot of classes where I was like, nah, not again, or teachers where I didn't like the voice of, and I really liked the person, but just I couldn't really relax into that voice, and really seeing that that's okay too, because other people can relax in that voice, and also see what kind of practices are good for you in that moment. And like with I teach living your Ladisen, and that's a practice that also really has a holistic view. So in the wintertime you do different things than you do in the summertime, and you have different energy systems working, and that also has to do with Chinese medicine. And don't have like a fixed thing, like, oh, this has to be it for the rest of my life. And then no, it can change, you change, and we all change. I think I just wanted to say something about the music, by the way, because that was you said with the 5 elements. I think it's very powerful, because music can give you feelings. Like, we all know that. It's not new information. But when I was in my burnout, and like, being conscious of also not only my own system, but also other systems, in like a lot of things went going on simultaneously. Music really helped me to process my feelings and dance it out. So I sometimes just put on very loud rock music or something, so not very, the flutes and the peaceful things, but really harsh music, because I felt so angry about something, or about what happened back then, and I didn't want to project that on other people. That's something I don't like, and don't think it's very fair and healing also. But I did need to process it. Like, I did need to do something with it. And on my own, it was very difficult to get there, because it was a bit scary, and I really judged my anger, and I judged my, more big feelings. And when I put on music, I just danced it out. And I also believe that traumas are in your body. So if you make room and if you let it flow, and then, it gets lighter in the end. So music is so powerful. Yeah.
I totally agree. And thanks for circling back to that as well. So tell me, what does your life look like now? And like, where do you feel you are in your healing journey now? Just to give people kind of a sense of, so you're a few years out of on your recovery from your burnout as well.
Mm-hmm. I'm fully healed. No, I think I never will, and or that's what I believe. But I'm a totally different person, and at the same time more myself. So it's sometimes a very strange feeling. It feels very peaceful and very nice, but I'm also so different than 10 years ago. It almost feels like, who was that person? And with peaceful, I don't mean that I don't have any things going on still, because I'm still on a journey of healing relationships, of healing nourishment, and I still struggle with, struggle, I think maybe it's a bit of a big word, but my intestines, my digestive system has always been sensitive from when I was very young. So that's not very new, but it really didn't get enough nourishment for 10 years. So I still have that going on at the moment. So I can't just eat everything and think my body will be fine with it. So it's a very interesting balance of having very nourishing foods and giving myself soul food and also baking cakes and enjoying myself and really get into the pleasure of food and eating, and at the same time also have to restrict some things which I don't necessarily like, because the word restriction already gives me a sense of like, I don't want it. But if I eat, for example, or drink 2 glasses of milk, I just get sick. So for me, that's also not pleasure. If you get sick from food, it's not very pleasurable. So I'm still on that journey of healing my body and my systems, and it's already so much better than it was. But it's just a balance also.
And the complexities of being a human. And I think this came up as well in a conversation with some people I had recently around recovery, and weren't necessarily just talking about eating disorder recovery, but like recovering from addiction or other health challenges and other mental health challenges as well. Like, does it like ever end?
Yeah.
And I think yes and no, in a sense of, I think it's, for me personally, it feels like important. It's a bit like with grief. It's like, does it ever end? No. And it also it can get a lot better than where you are, because different lived experiences that we have or that we've had in the past, they do shape us, I think. But the work that we're doing, like whatever that looks like, any of the healing work that we do, and in ways that we learn to better take care of ourselves, it does get easier. Would you not say it does get easier, right? So like if somebody's like in the beginning of this, because otherwise I'd feel like, well, what's the point? It's like, well, there's lots of points to why embarking on a recovery journey is worthwhile, because it does get easier and it does open up way, and it does, I think, I mean, the point of it is to help us get a better quality of life, whatever that looks like, and that might look different from each individual. And again, I see this in my clinical practice as well. It's like we have to really be aware that we monitor our expectations too, that it's like, if we have had a lived experience of an eating disorder, for example, or a difficult relationship with food, it's unlikely like that would ever entirely go away. That there's always things that can be, a little bit triggering, or like for me personally, I just know that I could never diet again, because that would really just undo, it's just not a thing I can do. And again, like what you're saying, which makes it difficult when you've had a lived experience with an eating disorder or disordered eating, and you might then end up in places where, well, not all foods really work for my body or at all times. And like, how do we navigate that so that doesn't sort of feed into those old brain pathways, of thinking? And it's just that kind of balance that you speak of. And the same with like our bodies, like we're not going to never like not like them again. It's like, there's days they're not comfortable places to be in, or you don't like what you see in the mirror. But the difference is, like, for me anyway, it's like I hear that old story and then I just go about my day. It's like, it's not like it has the impact it would have had years ago, where like, oh God, I feel this way about my body. Now I'm going to have to like do all of these other unhelpful behaviors to try to deal with that. It's like, oh, here goes that old story again. Yeah, okay. That's unpleasant. And then I just carry on eating whatever, it's just, it's like, oh. And also like this, the critical voice gets less loud, maybe, when we're working on self-compassion and taking care of ourselves. It doesn't go away, but it's just like, I think it was in Elizabeth Gilbert's book. She talks about that. I don't know if you've read that Big Magic that came out, gosh, a long time ago now. And she talked about like how she put it in the book, I think it was the inner critic, and she said, well, it's never going to go away. So you just have to take it on the ride. But what you can do is like remove it from the driver's seat and put it maybe in the boot, like that's the, but holding the expectations too, particularly if we're already coming from a place of perfectionism, that comes from a place of control. It's just like, this isn't about control, even in the recovery process. Like, it's about having more space to be flexible and meeting ourselves with kindness and those kind of things, right?
So much truth in that.
Yeah.
Really.
So I just want to round our conversation off by two things. I was really curious about this ITTI method that you are teaching. And then, of course, and I know you have alluded to this throughout our conversation today, around what joyful nourishment look like for you, which is something I ask everybody.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing that once I started my healing journey and really, really healed some things, my interest in food just got less and less and less. It was not so interesting anymore. Like I still like sometimes to really cook nice foods and stuff, but not so day consuming. And I just got sick of it. Like, I was like, oh my God, working with food all day, I just can't anymore. I don't want to. I don't feel the passion anymore. And I totally didn't understand it back then. And now I'm like, oh, that was actually might have been a good thing. So I started thinking about, okay, what do I want to do then? Like, what is my interest in life? And I'm still on that path. Like, I'm not fully knowing what I want to do with the rest of my life, but I am really into body work, into dance yoga. So that's something I did an education in and I teach. And I really love that. And the ITTI, that's something to do with talent analyzing, like personality tests, kind of. And what was really interesting for me in that it's something that really portrays your personality in a way where it isn't negative or positive. It's just the way you are and in which field or which kind of work or person, like also personal life, or how do you do other things, where is it the best place for you to be? And that's very interesting. Like, there's a lot of going on also unconsciously. And are you a very creative person or not? Are you an analytic, etc.? So I'm really interested in the psyche of people, but psyche embodiment. So it's still kind of health-based. Like, I think that's something I always will be interested in, but now it's more holistic. So it's not so pointed to one subject of food, but now it's more of holistic. Dance yoga is also to do a little bit with food, but not so much. And it's also very nourishing if you have a job where you feel very good and comfortable in, and the ITTI method can help you with pointing out which jobs are suitable or not. So it's very nourishing if you have a good job. So that is something. And then, how does your joyful nourishment look to me? I have one word where it was like, okay, that's like the big word where it kind of hangs everything around it, but it's pleasure. And with that, it's not only to go wild on sugary things because it gives you so much pleasure. Actually, that doesn't give me pleasure because I just feel sick. My body just doesn't like that. But it has to do with what kind of also healthy foods, because I am still into healthy foods, but in a different way now. It's more, if I give myself healthy foods, then my body will feel good and then I can do what I want to do, and that gives me a lot of pleasure. If I'm fit and vital and active, it gives me a lot of pleasure. And if I can relax into having my own baked apple pie, because I have, without some things I'm not so where I'm sensitive to, I make my own stuff, but it's not restricting me in the amount. That's maybe also the biggest thing. Like, I do have restriction in some like types of food, but that's health related. And now it's, if I want to eat chocolate or something, I have my own healthy kind of chocolate and I eat it. If I want to have some salad, I eat it, and I don't overeat, because overeating does not give me pleasure. Undereating does not give me pleasure.
Yeah.
And also not only with food, so it's nourishment in all senses, like all things in life. It's relationships, it's a lot more than only food.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, so pleasure from non-food things, and like pleasure, like relationships that feels nourishing and supportive, and other things. Yeah, I love asking people that question, because it's so interesting to hear the different answers.
Yeah.
And some people relate it directly to food, and some people relate it away from food, and for some people it seems to be a combination of both. And yeah, I love pleasure as a guiding principle in our life.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily, that's a whole other conversation we could have around, that. But I think it circles back to some of the things you said earlier around allowing yourself to receive that nourishment from not just food, but from other things. And that, I think that is a big part of healing our relationship with food, eating in our bodies. And it can take different shapes throughout that journey. But underneath, sometimes there's often that difficulty in doing just that.
Yes.
For different reasons, but yeah.
And allowing yourself to be yourself in whatever body you are in. Like, I'm a woman and I love my feminine body now. And that is something that doesn't really get taught a lot. Like, it's a lot of things like, what isn't good, what should you change, what is, oh my God, all the magazines that only come up with all these things. I'm like, okay, that's just not helpful. And it gives you so much joy and peace and pleasure to feel comfortable in your body, like in your own body, not wanting to change it.
Yeah.
And that's still sometimes a journey. What you said, like, that little voice is still sometimes there, but it's so worth it. If I look back at where I came from, of having that voice almost, well, not 24/7, but so much going in that driver's seat, and now having it in the back seat, it's still there. Sometimes it's like, you're annoying, but the overall thing in life is so much, it's so much better. So I really, if anybody hears this who is still in the midst of things, it is worth it. Like, no, it will never go away totally, maybe, but it's so worth it. Yeah.
Thank you, Mirte, for sharing your story. We really appreciated our conversation. And if people want to go and check you out, follow you somewhere, where can they find you?
Well, I'm still working on showing myself fit. I did a lot of trainings and stuff, so I have to see exactly, but I have an Instagram page where you can find me. I think you have the link to that. So it's Mirte _Kaan. Maybe a bit difficult for non-English people to.
I'll put a link to that in the show notes, and people can go and find you there.
Yeah, and I'm starting up my business now, so that is something that will come a bit later. Yeah.
So if people follow you there, then they will hear all about
new ventures. Yeah, and I also sent you the link to the ITTI where I work with the company, but that's not my own thing. So that's for a company where I work with. And,
I'd put a link to that too, if anybody wanted to check that out. It sounds really, I'm really fascinated by those things as well. It's like, oh,
super interesting.
you'd see where like, yeah, and sometimes you'd really resonate. It goes, I know that about myself, but somebody else named it through like a test or yeah, through any of these things. So again, thanks so much for being part of the Joyful Nourishment podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. The Joyful Nourishment podcast is produced with no financial backing, and your support means a lot to keep this project going. If this episode has been helpful in any way, please consider liking, subscribing, or leaving a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on. This helps the podcast to be found by others. And of course, you can also forward this episode to a friend whom you think may benefit. Find out more about what I offer on straightforwardnutrition.com, and if you're interested in working with me, please use the link in the show notes to book in for a free initial 30-minute session. And finally, please come and join the Joyful Nourishment community over on Substack, unless you're there already, by subscribing to my newsletter using the link below.